I watched from my car as my entire catering staff walked out of the reception hall carrying equipment, while 300 wedding guests stood in stunned silence around empty tables. My son's new wife was screaming something I couldn't hear through the closed windows. That moment right there cost me my relationship with my son for 18 months. But I'd do it again in a heartbeat. Welcome to Cheating Story Exposed. Real stories, real justice, no sugarcoating. You know what? I notice many of you watching haven't hit that subscribe button yet. Here's the thing, we drop stories like this every single day. Stories about people who got played, got smart, and got even. If you want to see how these situations really end, subscribe now and turn on notifications. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. My name is Thomas, and I've spent 23 years building my catering company from absolutely nothing into one of the most respected operations in the tri-state area. I'm not talking about some side hustle or weekend gig. I'm talking about a full commercial kitchen, 18 employees, contracts with venues across 3 states, and a reputation that made brides cry with relief when I agreed to take their event. I started in restaurant kitchens when I was 17, working my way up from dishwasher to line cook to sous chef. By 30, I was executive chef at a hotel that hosted 200 events a year. By 35, I'd saved enough to lease my first commercial space and strike out on my own. Those first 5 years nearly killed me. 18-hour days, 7 days a week, learning the business side while maintaining the quality that would make or break me. But I made it. By the time this story begins, I had a spotless reputation, a wait list for premium dates, and the kind of financial security that let me breathe for the first time in decades. My son, Nathan, was 28. I'd raised him mostly on my own after his mother, and I divorced when he was 7. She moved across the country for a job opportunity, and I got primary custody. Looking back, that was probably the best outcome. Nathan grew up in and around my business, sometimes doing homework in the office while I managed events. He went to college, got his degree in marketing, and landed a solid job at a tech firm. I was proud of him. He seemed happy, stable, making good money. Then 2 years ago, he started dating Victoria. I met her at a family barbecue Nathan hosted at his apartment. She was 26, working in pharmaceutical sales, attractive, confident, articulate. She talked a lot about her career, her goals, her 5-year plan. She asked polite questions about my business, but in a way that felt like she was checking boxes in a conversation rather than actually caring about the answers. Still, Nathan seemed smitten, and I figured every relationship has its dynamics. Over the next year and a half, I saw them maybe once every 6 weeks. They were busy with their careers, and I respected that. I was busy too, but I noticed small things, the way Victoria would redirect conversations to focus on her, the way she'd correct Nathan's stories in front of others, the way she'd make little comments about his apartment not being in the right neighborhood, his car not projecting the right image. Nathan never seemed bothered by it, or maybe he just didn't notice. He was in love. When he called to tell me they were engaged, I was genuinely happy for him. I took them out to dinner at one of the best restaurants in the city, the kind of place where I had connections and could ensure they'd be treated like royalty. Victoria spent most of the dinner on her phone, allegedly handling a work crisis. Nathan apologized for her 3 times. 2 weeks after the engagement dinner, Nathan came to my office. He seemed nervous, which was unusual. We'd always had an easy relationship. He sat down across from my desk and said he had a favor to ask. I told him to. Shoot, he said Victoria's family was helping with the wedding, but costs were adding up faster than expected. The venue alone was $40,000. They were expecting 300 guests. Her dress was custom. The flowers were being flown in from somewhere I'd never heard of. I waited knowing where this was going. He finally asked if I'd be willing to cater the wedding, as his gift to them. He said it would mean the world to him, and it would save them about $35,000 to $40,000, which they could put toward the honeymoon or the down payment on a house. Here's the thing about catering a wedding for 300 people at the level Victoria clearly expected. It's not just about food. It's about rentals, staff, coordination, setup, breakdown, liability insurance for the event, specialized equipment, premium ingredients, and about 200 hours of planning and preparation. At my standard rates, a wedding like the one they were describing would run $45,000 minimum, possibly pushing $55,000 depending on the menu. But this was my son, my only child, the kid I'd raised, put through college, supported through every phase of his life. Of course I said yes. Nathan hugged me, thanked me about 15 times, and said he couldn't wait to tell Victoria. I should have noticed he said he couldn't wait to tell her, not that they'd decided together to ask me. Over the next 2 weeks, I had 3 meetings with Victoria about the menu. These weren't casual conversations. These were full presentation meetings where I brought sample menus, photos of past events, detailed proposals. Victoria showed up to the first meeting 40 minutes late, didn't apologize, and immediately started crossing items off the proposed menu because they weren't upscale enough. I redesigned everything. The second meeting, she brought her maid of honor, who kept making comments about how her cousin's wedding had these tiny appetizers that were way better than anything she'd seen at other weddings. Victoria agreed, and they basically redesigned the entire appetizer service. I took notes, stayed professional, and redesigned again. The third meeting, Victoria showed up with a Pinterest board on her iPad containing roughly 800 photos of wedding food. She scrolled through them for 20 minutes, occasionally pausing to say things like this energy or this vibe. When I tried to narrow down specific dishes, she got frustrated and said she thought I was supposed to be the expert. She wanted me to figure it out but make sure it aligned with her vision, which she couldn't quite articulate but would know when she saw it. I left that meeting and spent 6 hours designing a menu that incorporated every single element she'd shown interest in. Past appetizers, station displays, a full-plated dinner with choices, a dessert service beyond the wedding cake, and a late-night snack station. I priced it out in my head, $62,000 if a client was paying. I was doing it for free. The final menu included herb-crusted lamb chops, pan-seared Chilean sea bass, truffle risotto, heirloom tomato salad with imported burrata, wild mushroom Wellington for vegetarian guests, 7 different past appetizers during cocktail hour, 3 station displays including a raw bar, and a dessert service featuring individual plated desserts plus a separate station with French macarons, chocolate truffles, and miniature tarts. Plus the late-night station with sliders, truffle fries, and specialty tacos. I presented this to Victoria at her bridal shower, which her mother hosted at their home. Her mother seemed nice enough, a bit overwhelmed by Victoria's intensity, but gracious. Victoria looked at the menu for maybe 90 seconds and said it looked good. That was it. No thank you, no acknowledgement of the work, just a quick approval before moving on to opening gifts. I stayed for the shower because Nathan had asked me to. I helped. Victoria's father set up chairs, made small talk with relatives I didn't know, and generally tried to be present and supportive. That's when I heard it. I was in the kitchen refilling ice buckets. Victoria's parents had a nice house with one of those open-concept designs where the kitchen flows into the living area, but there was a butler's pantry off to the side that was more secluded. I'd gone in there to find extra ice because the main freezer was packed with shower food. I heard Victoria's voice from just around the corner in the hallway that connected to the main kitchen. She was talking to 2 of her bridesmaids. One of them said something about the menu sounding incredible. Victoria laughed and said, "Well, I hope so, considering we're getting it for free from the help." One of the bridesmaids said, "Wait, your father-in-law is doing this?" Victoria said, "Yeah, Nathan's dad owns a catering company or whatever. It's basically cheap labor, but free is free. Better than spending our own money on food people barely remember anyway." The other bridesmaid said that's actually really generous of him. Victoria said, "Sure, but let's be real, he's not doing it out of pure love. He wants to show off. Small business owners are always desperate to prove themselves. This way he gets to tell people he catered a 300-person wedding. Free advertising." They laughed. Someone changed the subject to Victoria's bachelorette party in Miami. They walked away, and I stood there in the butler's pantry holding a bag of ice, processing what I'd just heard, the help, cheap labor, free advertising, not someone who acts impulsively. I didn't storm out of the shower. I didn't confront Victoria. I finished refilling the ice, rejoined the party, and stayed until it was appropriate to leave. I drove home, sat in my home office, and did something I rarely do. I poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon and thought about what I'd heard. Here's what bothered me most. It wasn't that she didn't appreciate the gift. Some people aren't good at expressing gratitude. It was the contempt, the casual dismissal of my profession, my expertise, my gesture. The implication that I was somehow benefiting from providing $60,000 worth of services for free. The characterization of me as the help, like I was staff she'd hired rather than her future father-in-law providing a massive gift. I didn't sleep much that night. By morning, I'd made my decision. I called my business attorney first thing Monday morning. I explained the situation without emotion, just facts. I was providing catering services as a gift for my son's wedding. I needed to know my legal position if I chose to cancel. He asked if there was a written contract. I said no, it was a family arrangement. He said then I was under no legal obligation to provide services. I could cancel any time. He advised giving as much notice as possible to avoid family drama, but legally I was clear. Next, I called my insurance broker. Same question, different angle. If I canceled catering services for a family event I'd agreed to do for free, was there any liability exposure? She said no. No contract, no payment, no liability. She actually laughed and said this was a family dispute, not a business matter, and I should handle it however I saw fit. Then I did something that might seem calculating, but I needed to be sure I'd heard what I thought I'd heard. I called Nathan and asked him to lunch. Over sandwiches at a deli near his office, I asked him how Victoria was feeling about the wedding planning. He said she was stressed but excited. I asked if she'd said anything about the catering. He looked confused and said no, why? I said I just wanted to make sure she was happy with the menu. He said as far as he knew, everything was great. I pressed a little. I said planning a wedding for 300 people is expensive, and I wanted to make sure they felt good about all the elements. Nathan said they were incredibly grateful for what I was doing, that it was taking a huge financial pressure off them, and that Victoria's parents were impressed I'd stepped up like this. That's when I knew Victoria hadn't told Nathan what she really thought. To Nathan, this was his father being generous. To Victoria, this was free labor from the help. The disrespect wasn't just toward me. It was also dishonest toward my son. I went back to my office and pulled up my calendar. The wedding was in 42 days. I'd already ordered specialty rentals. I'd confirmed my staff schedule. I'd put deposits on premium ingredients that had to be ordered weeks in advance. I turned down 2 other events on the same date, both of which would have paid $30,000 or more. I opened my project management software and looked at everything I'd done so far. Menu design, rental coordination, staff scheduling, ingredient sourcing, timeline creation, venue coordination. Conservatively, I'd already invested 80 hours of work. My team had invested another 40 hours combined. For the next 41 days, I continued preparing for the wedding exactly as planned. I ordered every ingredient. I confirmed every rental. I finalized the staff schedule. I coordinated with the venue. I did tastings with Victoria, who showed up 25 minutes late and gave minimal feedback. I communicated with Nathan regularly, who was genuinely excited and grateful. I didn't tell anyone what I was going to do. Not my staff, not my attorney, not Nathan, nobody. I prepared that wedding like it was the most important event of my career. Because in a way, it was. The wedding was on a Saturday in early October. Perfect weather, evening ceremony, reception to follow. The venue was a historic estate with gardens and a ballroom, beautiful location. The ceremony was at 5, reception at 6:30. My team was scheduled to arrive at 10 in the morning to begin setup. I arrived at 9:30 with my head chef and 2 of my senior staff members. We walked through the space, confirmed power sources, identified where each station would go, reviewed the timeline with the venue coordinator. Everything was perfect. At 10, the rest of my team arrived in 3 vehicles loaded with equipment, ingredients, and supplies. We worked through the day like a machine. My team is exceptionally good at what they do. By 3 o'clock, we had the cocktail hour stations set up and ready, all past appetizers prepped, and in warming drawers, the full dinner service prepped and ready to plate, and the dessert displays constructed. The raw bar was iced and stocked. The late-night station was ready to go. Everything gleamed. At 4 o'clock, I checked in with the venue coordinator. The ceremony was starting in an hour. Guests would begin arriving any minute for a 4:30 arrival. Cocktail hour would run from 5:30 to 6:30. Dinner service at 7. Everything was on schedule. At 4:15, Victoria arrived with her bridesmaids to get ready in the bridal suite. Nathan was in a different area with his groomsmen. I saw Victoria briefly. She walked past the catering prep area with her bridesmaids, saw our setup, and said something to one of them that I didn't hear. They laughed. She didn't acknowledge me or my team. At 4:30, I gathered my staff in the catering prep area. 18 people looking at me, waiting for final instructions before the event began. I said I needed everyone to stop what they were doing. Confused looks. I said we were packing up and leaving, everything, all of it. The silence lasted about 5 seconds before my head chef asked if I was serious. I said completely serious. We were loading every piece of equipment, every ingredient, every rental item, and leaving. Right now. Someone asked what happened. I said it didn't matter, we were done, and we were leaving immediately. To their credit, my team didn't argue. They're professionals. They've worked with me. For years, they trust my judgment. We began the breakdown. We packed the raw bar, $300 worth of oysters, shrimp, and crab. We packed the lamb chops, the sea bass, the truffle risotto. We broke down the appetizer stations, the dessert displays. We loaded rental dishes, chafers, linens. We dismantled the late-night station. It took 45 minutes. The venue coordinator came over twice asking what was happening. I told her we were canceling our services. She asked why. I said it was a private family matter. She asked if I understood there were 300 guests expected. I said I did. She said they had no food. I said I understood that as well. She asked what she should tell the family. I said that was up to her. At 5:15, as guests began arriving for the ceremony, my team loaded the last of our equipment into our vehicles. I did a final walkthrough to make sure we hadn't left anything. The cocktail hour space, which 20 minutes earlier had looked like something from a magazine, was now completely empty. Just tables, chairs, and bare surfaces. I walked to my car. Through the windows of the venue, I could see the ceremony area filling with guests. Nathan was at the front with the officiant and groomsmen waiting. He had no idea what was about to happen. That part hurt, but I'd made my decision. I sat in my car for a minute, then pulled out my phone and called Nathan. It went to voicemail. I left a message. I said I was sorry, but I couldn't provide catering services for his wedding. I said I'd overheard Victoria at her bridal shower referring to me as cheap labor and the help, and I couldn't give a gift to someone who had such contempt for me and my profession. I said I loved him. I was sorry to hurt him, but I couldn't go through with this. I hung up. Then I started my car and led the convoy of catering vehicles off the property. In my rearview mirror, I saw the venue coordinator running toward the building, presumably to inform someone that the caterer and all the food had just left. I drove back to my commercial kitchen. My team followed. We unloaded everything in near silence. The food that could be salvaged, we salvaged. The rentals, we stored. When everything was put away, I gathered everyone and thanked them. I said I knew this was unprecedented and probably confusing, and I appreciated their professionalism. I gave everyone a bonus for the day, full event pay plus 50% extra. They deserved it. My head chef, Alina, who'd been with me for 11 years, pulled me aside before leaving. She asked if I was okay. I said honestly I didn't know. She said whatever happened, she trusted my judgment. That meant something. I went home. I turned my phone off. I poured bourbon and sat on my back deck until it got dark. I didn't regret my decision, but I wasn't celebrating either. I'd just blown up my relationship with my son on his wedding day. That wasn't something to feel good about. I turned my phone back on around 10 that night. 63 missed calls, 47 text messages, 12 voicemails. I went through them systematically. Nathan had called 21 times. Victoria called 4 times. Victoria's mother called twice. Victoria's father called once. Numbers I didn't recognize called the rest, probably wedding guests or venue staff. The text messages were a mix of confusion, anger, and profanity. Victoria's were particularly colorful, calling me every name you can imagine and several creative combinations. Nathan's progressed from confused to angry to what sounded like genuine distress. His last text, sent at 9:47, said simply, "Dad, call me, please." The voicemails were harder. Nathan's first few were from the venue, panicked, asking what happened, and where was I. The later ones were from after the wedding, after they'd had to tell 300 guests there was no food. One voicemail was just Nathan crying. That one I had to listen to 3 times because I couldn't quite make out the words through the sobbing. I didn't return any calls that night. I needed to think. The next morning, Sunday, I drove to Nathan's apartment. I figured he and Victoria would be there, either packing for their honeymoon or dealing with the aftermath of the night before. I rang the bell. Nathan answered. He looked like he hadn't slept. His eyes were red. He just stared at me. I asked if I could come in. He stepped aside. Victoria was on the couch, still in pajamas, looking at her phone. She looked up at me with pure hatred. I said I wanted to explain. Victoria said there's nothing to explain. You humiliated us in front of everyone we know. Nathan just stood there. I asked if we could talk privately. Nathan said anything I had to say, I could say in front of Victoria. I said fine. I told them I'd overheard Victoria at the bridal shower calling me cheap labor and the help, saying I was doing the catering for free advertising. I said I couldn't give a gift to someone who had such contempt for me. Victoria immediately said I misheard. I said I didn't. She said I was lying. I said I wasn't. Nathan looked at Victoria. He said, "Is that true?" She said, "Absolutely not. Your father is making this up because he wanted to back out and needed an excuse." I said I had no reason to make it up. Victoria said, "You're jealous because I'm successful and you're just a caterer." That's when Nathan flinched. He looked at Victoria and said, "Just a caterer." She caught herself, but not fast enough. She said, "You know what I mean. I'm not saying his job isn't legitimate, but this is about him lying to cover his ass." I said I wasn't lying and I wasn't covering anything. I'd provided catering services at my own expense to thousands of clients over 23 years. I'd built a respected business from nothing. I'd raised Nathan as a single father while building that business. I wasn't ashamed of what I did, and I wouldn't apologize for refusing to be disrespected. Victoria said, "You ruined our wedding over a conversation you supposedly overheard where I supposedly said something you supposedly didn't like. We had 300 guests. Do you know what that looked like? Do you know what we had to do? Nathan's father-in-law had to order pizza. Pizza for 300 people. At a wedding that cost us $80,000. I said you didn't pay me $45,000 for catering, so I'm not sure how you got to $80,000. Victoria said venue, dress, flowers, band, photographer. I said those were your choices. You wanted a 300-person wedding at a luxury venue. The catering was supposed to be my gift to give or not give. Nathan finally spoke. He said you couldn't have told me before. You had to wait until the actual wedding day. I said I made my decision and I acted on it. He said you humiliated me in front of everyone I know. I said I'm sorry you're humiliated. I'm sorry your wedding didn't go as planned, but I wasn't going to provide $60,000 in services to someone who called me the help. Victoria stood up. She said, "Get out." I said, "This is Nathan's apartment, not yours." She said, "We're married now, it's my apartment too. Get out." Nathan said, "Dad, maybe you should go." I looked at him. He wouldn't meet my eyes. I left. I didn't hear from Nathan for 6 weeks. In that time, I got 2 letters from attorneys. The first was from Victoria's family attorney, threatening a lawsuit for breach of contract and emotional distress. I forwarded it to my attorney, who responded with a letter explaining there was no contract and no legal grounds for any claim. We never heard back. The second letter was from a different attorney, representing Nathan and Victoria jointly, demanding reimbursement for wedding expenses they'd incurred due to my cancellation. Specifically, they wanted $45,000, the cost they estimated they'd saved by having me cater, which they now claimed as damages. Since they'd had to provide alternative food at the last minute, my attorney responded that there was no legal basis for this claim. They'd suffered no quantifiable damages since they hadn't paid me anything in the first place, and any further communications should go through his office. That was the end of the legal threats, but it wasn't the end of the social fallout. Victoria's family, and presumably their friends, had been told some version of events that painted me as unstable or vindictive. I started getting online reviews on my business page from people who'd never used my services, 1-star ratings with comments like "owner is unprofessional" or "can't be trusted." I had to hire a reputation management company to address it. Several of Nathan's relatives called me, his grandmother, 2 of his cousins, his aunt. They'd all heard different versions of what happened. I told them the truth, exactly what I've told you. Some believed me. Some said it sounded like a misunderstanding that got out of hand. Nathan's grandmother said I should have been the bigger person and done the wedding anyway. I disagreed but didn't argue. Around week 8, Nathan called. He asked if we could meet. I said yes. We met at a park near his apartment, neutral territory. He looked exhausted. He said the last 2 months had been hell. The wedding had become a disaster story everyone talked about. Their honeymoon, which they'd gone on despite everything, had been tense and unhappy. Victoria was furious constantly. Her family was pressuring him to cut me off completely. I asked what he wanted from me. He said he wanted to understand why I did it that way, why I couldn't have just told him what I'd heard and canceled the week before. I said because I didn't decide until I was ready to decide. He said that's not good enough. I said it's the only answer I have. He asked if I'd actually heard what I claimed I heard. I looked at him. I said yes. He looked away. I said, "Do you believe me?" He said, "I don't know." I said, "Then we have nothing else to talk about." I stood up to leave. He said, "Wait." I stopped. He said Victoria admitted she said something like that. Not exactly that, but close enough. She said it was just wedding stress. She was venting. She didn't mean it the way it sounded. She said lots of people say things they don't mean when they're stressed. He said she apologized. He asked if that changed anything. I said, did she apologize to me? He said no. I said then it changes nothing. He said, you're really going to throw away our relationship over this? I said, I'm not throwing anything away. I'm requiring basic respect. If Victoria thinks I'm just cheap labor and the help, she doesn't respect me. If you married someone who doesn't respect me, that's your choice. But I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen. Nathan said, you're being stubborn. I said, I'm being clear about my boundaries. There's a difference. He said, Victoria's my wife now. I said, I understand. He said, that means you need to find a way to get along with her. I said, no, it means you need to decide whether you can have a relationship with me despite having a wife who doesn't respect me. That's your decision, not mine. We stood there for a minute. Then Nathan said, I guess that's it then. I said, I guess so. He walked away. 4 more months passed. I threw myself into work. Business was actually up. Apparently, the online review attacks had generated enough curiosity that new clients were booking consultations to see what the fuss was about. Once they met me and saw my operation, they booked. I landed 2 major corporate contracts and 3 high-end weddings. Elena asked me a few times if I was doing okay. I said I was fine. She said, you don't seem fine. I said I was working through something. She said, take care of yourself. I appreciated her. Around the 6-month mark, I got a call from Nathan's grandmother, Rose. She was 84, sharp as ever, and had always been direct with me. She said she wanted me to know that Nathan had been coming to her house to talk, sometimes once a week. She said he was struggling. His marriage wasn't what he'd expected. Victoria was controlling, dismissive of his opinions, and increasingly demanding. Rose said Victoria had started making comments about Nathan's job not being ambitious enough, his apartment not being in the right area, his car not being appropriate for someone at his level. I said that sounded familiar. Rose said she told Nathan that Victoria treated him the same way she'd treated me, with contempt wrapped in expectations. Nathan had apparently gotten defensive, but Rose said she could see him starting to recognize the pattern. I thanked Rose for telling me. She said Nathan loved me and missed me, even if he couldn't admit it yet. I said I loved him too. 3 weeks after that conversation, Nathan showed up at my commercial kitchen on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in my office doing invoicing. My assistant buzzed me and said Nathan was there. I told her to send him in. He sat down across from my desk. He looked different, thinner, tired, older than his 29 years. He didn't say anything for a minute. Then he said, I think I'm getting divorced. I said, I'm sorry. He said, are you? I said, yes, I'm sorry you're in pain. He said, even though you were right about her. I said, being right doesn't make me happy about you hurting. He asked if he could tell me something. I said, of course. He said Victoria had been escalating for months. The criticism, the control, the dismissiveness. It started with big things like where they should live and what car he should drive. Then it moved to smaller things, how he dressed, who he spent time with, how he spent his free time. Last week, she'd told him his job was embarrassing and he needed to find something more prestigious, or she didn't know if she could stay married to someone so lacking in ambition. I said that must have hurt. He said it did. Then he said she told him his biggest problem was he was too much like his father. He said that's when something clicked. I said, what clicked? He said, I realized she didn't respect me any more than she respected you. And I was letting her treat me that way. I asked what he was going to do. He said he'd already moved out. He was staying with a friend while he figured things out. He'd told Victoria he wanted a separation. She'd responded by threatening to take everything in the divorce, claiming he was abandoning her. He said her true colors were showing now that he'd pushed back. I asked if he needed anything. He said, actually, yes. He asked if I'd have dinner with him, just us. Like we used to before Victoria. I said I'd like that. We made plans for that Friday. Over dinner, we talked for 3 hours. He apologized for not believing me immediately about what I'd overheard. He said he'd been so deep in the relationship that he couldn't see what was obvious to everyone else. He said he understood now why I'd pulled the catering, even though the timing and method had been painful. He said I'd been trying to show him something important, and he'd been too stubborn to see it. I told him I hadn't pulled the catering to teach him a lesson. I'd done it because I wouldn't be disrespected, but if there was a lesson in there, I was glad he'd learned it. He asked if we could rebuild our relationship. I said we'd never stopped having a relationship. We just had a painful period. He was my son. That didn't change. The divorce took 11 months. Victoria fought everything, but Nathan had excellent documentation of her behavior, including text messages where she'd said truly horrible things once he'd moved out. In the end, they split their shared assets and went their separate ways. Nathan told me the process had been exhausting but clarifying. He'd learned what he would and wouldn't tolerate in a relationship. It's been 18 months since the wedding now. Nathan and I have dinner every couple of weeks. He's dating someone new, a woman named Rachel who works in nonprofit management. She's kind, funny, and treats him with genuine respect. I met her last month. She asked intelligent questions about my business, laughed at my stories, and seemed to actually care about the answers. After dinner, Nathan asked what I thought. I said I liked her. He said good because I'm serious about her. Last week, Nathan stopped by the kitchen unannounced. He said he wanted to ask me something. I said go ahead. He said Rachel's birthday was coming up and he wanted to throw her a party. Just close friends, maybe 30 people, nothing elaborate. He asked if I'd be willing to cater it. Not as a gift, he wanted to pay my full rate. He said it would mean a lot to him to have my food at an event that mattered to him again. I said I'd be honored. I asked what Rachel liked. He said she was simple in her tastes but appreciated quality. I said I could work with that. We spent an hour going over menu options. Nathan was engaged, asking good questions, respecting my expertise. It felt right. The party is in 3 weeks. I'm designing the menu now. It'll be elegant but approachable, focused on seasonal ingredients and thoughtful preparation. Exactly the kind of event I love to do. And this time I'll be cooking for people who respect what I do. Looking back, pulling my catering from Nathan's wedding cost me 18 months of relationship with my son, significant stress, some business reputation issues I had to actively manage, and countless hours of wondering if I'd made the right call. But it also taught Nathan a crucial lesson about respect, boundaries, and recognizing when someone is treating you with contempt. It forced him to confront patterns in his marriage that were damaging him. And ultimately, it brought us back to a healthier relationship than we'd had before. Would I do it again? Yes, without question, because some things are more important than keeping the peace. Sometimes you have to be willing to blow things up to protect your dignity and show someone you love what they deserve. The fallout was painful, but the outcome was worth it. Nathan knows his worth now. He chose differently the second time. And we're closer than we've been in years. Respect isn't negotiable. Boundaries aren't optional. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to accept their poor treatment of you, even when it costs you both dearly in the short term. That's the lesson. That's what I'd want anyone in a similar situation to understand. You teach people how to treat you. And sometimes the teaching requires drastic action. I'm Thomas. I built a successful business through 23 years of hard work. I raised a good son. And when someone I'd never even sent a bill to called me cheap labor and the help, I chose my dignity over their convenience. I'd make that choice every single time.